Cool. Well, yeah, I figure let's jump in and uh, talk about this. I wanted to kick off with the interview questions. We could run through these, kind of think about them, and then if anybody wants to like share or answer, we can do that as well. This is literally questions that either I've asked or have been asked of me. Went back and pulled some after listening to prior interviews. So yeah, we'll just kind of walk through these and then we'll jump back into questions or technical questions. Um, cool. So did anybody, I know we were going to do this last week, so you had 2 weeks. Did anybody put some thought or time into the colloquial question of like, cool, this is our company. Why don't you start off by telling me a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to, as to how you would introduce yourself, elevator pitch or whatever you want to call it. Anybody? This is the one that's probably the most. I don't want to say it's like the most important, but it really does set the stage for the interview, and it's really kind of a first impression. So it's important in that aspect. So does anybody like care to share how they might go if I was to say, this is our company, yada, yada, yada. Thanks for applying. Now, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to? Have an idea what you would say? George is like smiling, so I'm assuming that's a yes.
No, I'm thinking not it.
Oh, all right. Well,
no. If nobody wants to go, I will stumble through it.
Yeah, I mean, if you feel like, hey, I wasn't going to force anybody to, but I wanted to urge to think about it. But if you want to take a shot at it, sure.
For sure. So yeah, go ahead and ask me the question.
Yeah. So once again, I want to thank you for applying. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our company. I just told you a little bit about our company. So why don't you take a couple minutes and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to?
Yes, of course. So my name is Jorge, and I'm a software engineer specializing in JavaScript and Python for backend development. For the past few months, I've been attending the school Springboard, where I've been learning software engineering and working on various projects. While being there, I've also been working with other software engineers of various experience levels. For example, I meet with a senior level software engineer on a weekly basis, and this person kind of serves as a mentor role. But I also meet with other senior level engineers to undergo code review, make sure that all of my code is, all the code quality is there. But really the focus while being at Springboard has been on getting my software engineering skills and my development skills up to the professional level. And now I'm at a point now where I'm confident I can succeed as a software engineer. I'm also applying particularly at places that I know not only I could be successful in, but ones that I would really enjoy working at.
Cool. And so what brings you to our company, or what's your interest in this position or our company that you know absolutely nothing about?
So I really appreciate that this company appreciates having a diverse workforce, and that they value having a diverse workforce. And that's something that I definitely look into. I know that this company in particular that I know nothing about has had a consistent record of producing software of high quality, and I definitely want to be working in an environment that is conducive of having those high expectations for excellent software.
Cool. And just real quick, would you mind telling us a little bit about a recent project maybe you worked on and what your role was in that project?
Yeah, so I will tell you about my latest capstone project. For this application, I used Flask, which is a lightweight framework using Python to build out the backend for the application. What this application does, it seeks to bridge communication between speakers of different languages. You can have somebody speaking English and they are able to communicate with somebody that speaks only Portuguese. And this is being done through a messaging application that I built. and it uses Google Cloud Translations API to do all the translating app, but it's what allows users to send and receive messages in their own language, where the other speaker on the other end will also see and send the same messages, their messages, in the language of their preference. And this way they are able to, two people are able to communicate with one another that may not have been able to communicate before. And this kind of speaks a little bit about some of the things that I'm passionate about, and really is passionate about bringing people of different cultures together. And, you know, that kind of reflects a little bit through this project that I worked on.
Cool. Good job.
Bro, that was like you were throwing questions you did not say you were going to be throwing at me.
Good job,
So,
Jorge.
Thank you.
yeah, that was.
Hey, Beatrice.
She says hi. This is Beatrice Paul. She's my daughter.
What up? Cool. Yeah, that was dope. All right. Well, unless you want to take a stab, do you feel like taking a stab at it?
Who are you directing your question to?
You.
Oh, yeah,
Huh?
sure.
All right. Thanks for what do I want to say? Thanks for coming. Tell you a little bit about the company. Cool. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to and why you might be interested in this position.
Yeah, I'm a software engineer based in Phoenix. I've been working with the Bootcamp Springboard. I come from a teaching background where I was learning my leadership and communication skills. And then my desire to do something super creative brought me to digital marketing. And from there, I came into contact with software engineers and discovered just how interesting the problems they were solving were. So I decided to take the leap and start a boot camp. And I'm waiting for you to ask the question about what drew you to company, right? So I'll just stop there.
You can take it in whatever direction you want and kind of hit all of them. I mean, it's up to you. But yeah, why are you interested in this particular position or company?
I've heard from a friend in my network that this company has a very strong program for junior developers, and that they also attend to soft skills like teamwork and leadership. And that's something I'm highly interested in for my career, like reaching out to the future. So.
Sweet. And do you mind sharing a recent project that you worked on and describe your role in that project?
Sure, I'll share about my capstone project at Springboard. It was a project using Flask and Python, as well as a little bit of JavaScript and Jinja to connect to a NASA API so that users could log in and see, based on which Mars rover they selected, pictures from the surface of Mars. The purpose of it was to educate people and get them more excited about the Mars mission.
Cool. All right, let's see. We can just run through these questions a little bit. I'll just kind of talk them out, think about them. So again, what was the hardest project you ever worked on? Why was it difficult? If it was an application algorithm, can you explain how it works? So this can be like tied into a recent project, or if there's something particular that stands out. Sometimes like there's particular projects or particular things that I've dealt with that I just have kind of flagged in my memory to talk about that were particularly difficult or particularly like annoying, or the solution was not entirely obvious. So that's sort of what that is. This is one that I will usually typically ask. How do you stay up to date with technology news? So I'm curious. Do you guys keep up to date with technology? And how are you guys doing it?
And there's Twitter, and then there's also like the FANG companies have websites where they release their, their pre-boiled marketing news things, but I like using Twitter.
Okay. Yeah, Twitter's just fine. There's like, so like personally, I subscribe to a lot of newsletters. There's that. There's Hacker News, like Y Combinator. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I mean, really, there's no right answer to this. It's just kind of like, are you keeping up to date? Sometimes a follow-up question specifically, well, this was big when ES6 was out. The follow-up question would be like, are you familiar with the new ES6 standard and can you describe it a little bit? So if there's anything, like if you're saying like, hey, I'm a Python developer or something, and there's something that is newsworthy going on, you might receive like a follow-up question that's like, hey, well, this has been something that's been in the news recently, or a recent release that was made. Like if Python was to come out with Python v4, because when they went from 2.5 to 3, it was a big deal because of compatibility and stuff. So if they were to go to like a v4, you should probably know about that if you're claiming to do Python. Same thing with JavaScript. If Node or JavaScript released a new version, a new ECMAScript version or something, you might get a follow-up. So that's usually what that question is a primer to. What side projects have you working on? So sometimes you'll be asked this, sometimes they don't want to know because you're supposed to be getting a job with them and not working on like things, or that's your after time. So it really doesn't matter what you're working on. This might come from like if they've seen your GitHub or your resume, and if it mentions any like projects you've worked on your own, and an opportunity to kind of talk about those. Any languages or frameworks that you'd like to learn in the future? How would you go about teaching yourself? Why did you pick those? Again, this is a great one. If there is a particular technology or language and the company uses it, it's a great tie in there. Also, if you know that they use, say they do Ruby and you've come from a JavaScript and Python background, you can say, hey, I recognize that I'm coming in and this isn't my background, but I'm eager to learn and I want to learn this. Sometimes having people who just want to learn and are open to being a blank slate and learning how to do is preferable than somebody that would come in and say like, oh, yeah, I've been writing Ruby for 5 years and I can tell you exactly how I do all these things. And then it might go, oh, well, we don't do things that way. Are they going to, clash? Do we feel like they're receptive to the way that we do things here? Or is it going to be a problem? And sometimes being a blank slate, but super eager to learn shows off a little bit better. Have you ever worked with a team to complete a project? If so, what role did you play in the project? I kind of threw this up top because it's one that I've asked before. What did you enjoy? What issues did you encounter? And this is just kind of like do you play well with others type of question. Experience with Agile. So because everybody's doing a flavor of Agile, whether it's straight up Agile or 2-week sprints or Kanban or Scrum or something. You might not, if you haven't worked on a team that runs Agile, but pretty much every technology team's doing some form of Agile. So, what got you into coding? Why are you interested in a career in software developer? I'm going to toss this out to both of you because this is something that because you're coming in and it's very evident, and you guys even in your intros have kind of talked about that. I can see this definitely being a question that you get asked as a follow-up potentially. So, and also I'm kind of curious because I don't think I know either of yours like whys, like your personal whys as to like why you decided to go into this direction, or at least maybe not as much as you might go into. So who wants to take that one? I'm personally interested in your answer to this question.
I'll take it. I went through a lot of jobs in my early 20s, as you could see on my resume. And I was searching for one that would never get boring. Like I could never get to the top of learning all the skills. And I was also searching for a job that I would genuinely enjoy. And I had tried coding off and on over the years, never really getting past like deploying the front end of a website, or not even deploying it, just running it. And when I left digital marketing during the pandemic, I had the time to really invest in it. And I started doing some free code camp things. And from there, I realized it was the most fun I'd had, like from day to day since college and when I was doing my minor in mathematics. And yeah, I was just kind of addicted to it. Like I had to, at the beginning, I had to like take a step back and be like, okay, you know, I'm going to set a timer for, you know, taking my meals and getting my exercise. Otherwise it's not going to happen. And luckily that way I've avoided burnout so far. But it's just been something I've truly enjoyed, and I'm excited to get into it as a career because I know I'll never get bored there.
Cool.
Yeah, and likewise, like Lucia, it's something that I've like throughout the years have kind of dabbled with, right? Like I look back and I remember when I purchased the book on Introduction to Computer Science using Python, right? And I got that book and I had it, and I've had it like for 10 years now. But it's something that I just like embarrassingly didn't really make that connection that I can really do this as a career, because I don't know what I had in my mind that software engineering, like that it was something that was unattainable to me. So even though it was something that I enjoyed doing as a hobby, like, you know, doing like little coding challenges at the end of the chapter, algorithm problems like that, it wasn't something that I necessarily understood really that it was an option for me and that I was completely capable of being successful in it, right? So I have had that genuine interest for a while, and unfortunately it's something that like just recently, as I've kind of seen the field itself kind of being actively more open to people of newcomers and being and reaching out to people of like different backgrounds, I've kind of felt that like invite to you know what, maybe it is something that I can do, maybe it is something that I will be successful in. And so as soon as I like really delved into it and like in a more serious manner, then that's when I got really sucked in, and I was like, oh, I'm actually quite good at this. And
Yeah, I gotta say, I feel you there, Jorge. I have uncles who are like in FANG now, and I grew up them all being like kind of dismissive of me a little bit, and they're all like males. I mean, you know, of course, that was when they were teenagers, so now they're very, very much
right.
kind, mature people. But for a while, I perceived tech as being like, especially since also all the friends I knew from college who went into it were males. I perceived it as, you know, a place where I wasn't represented and that would be hard for me to get into, but I don't see that as much anymore, for sure.
Right. Yeah, there definitely is more of an outreach from the tech community, the tech industry, to try to be a little bit more inclusive. And I think I've kind of, in a way, I've been on the receiving end of that, right? Like I've now more recently felt that invite, like, hey, you should come do this. And having that invite is kind of what gave me that final push to like go ahead and try it. And, you know, again, once I like more seriously felt like, okay, I'm going to do this, then there was like no going back. And, you know, now I'm just like growing in skill set. And now I'm definitely at a point where I can't go back, because I'm like, I know what I'm capable of. And I know now, like in just a few months time, that how much more I'm gonna continue to grow if in such a short amount of time I've, you know, completely become somebody whose skill set has increased quite a bit.
Nice. Apologies, I had to get headphones in that process, but I was listening. Yeah, those are dope. Let's see. Yeah, what are your favorite types of projects to work on? I think that both of you kind of mentioned that, specifically in like what you're looking for. So technical questions. So these are the fun ones. So we'll go through these one by one. Shout them out if y'all have answers. What's the difference between a get and a post when specifying an AJAX request?
I can offer one, and I'm sure Jorge also has a clear idea of this. But again, receives data from the server, and then a post basically sends data to the server. Is my understanding of it.
Want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. So to build on what Lucia said, for a GET request, the pattern is when the user sends a GET request, it is asking to receive information from the server. When the user is making a POST request, what they are doing is sending off a piece of information to that server and awaiting some. And that has some sort of consequence that the server interacts with, whether it's an addition of information or however it is that the server processes it with. But the difference is that with a POST request, a user is making a request while at the same time sending a piece of data with it.
Cool.
Right.
What does JSON stand for?
JavaScript Object Notation.
Cool. What is it used for?
Like, isn't it used for sending and receiving requests from the server? And then you have various frameworks that work with JSON to work it back into the language you're working with.
Yeah, that's not wrong. No. Any more detail that can be added would be appreciated.
So I think it's just a format, right? That many different pieces of technology. I'm not sure what the right terminology here is, but it's a format to kind of store information, right? So you can have object information that's represented as an object in the JavaScript language, but it's not just used by JavaScript. It can be used by web applications or Python. It's more or less kind of an agreed format that can transcend different frameworks and languages.
Yeah, and the syntax looks like you've got your object and your keys and values, and they're all within double quotes usually, and separated by colons, the keys and values.
Yeah, so I guess that's all correct. Typically, you'd call that like a serialization format. That's basically what it's doing, is it's taking an object and turning it into a string. That's why if you're like in JavaScript creating it, you do like JSON.stringify or JSON.parse to get it from JSON format from the string and back into an object. So serialization format, and it does serialization. And then it's like a standard data transfer delivery format. So there's other ways that you can transfer data between machines or between client and server. You could do it like the old school way to go before JSON. You do like XML was a delivery and transfer format. It was super verbose. Then we can have JSON. Then you can do binary protocols, binary transfer stuff. It's always a trade-off between readability and size or like overhead when you mess with these different formats. And JSON kind of strikes this arguably middle ground between it's still readable and human parsable, but it's it's low overhead. So it works good for a lot of different things. What's a callback function in JavaScript, and when would you use one?
It's been a while since JavaScript. Is that like when you're calling another function within a function just to separate your logic a little bit?
I'm going to say no. I wouldn't accept that definition.
That would have been my definition. Yeah, so a callback.
Can you give me an example of one? That's a better.
Perhaps maybe a callback function is a function that's called within a function that is trying to, how can I say this? Like if certain conditions are met, it's a way to call a function within a function. Yeah, that's a hard one.
Okay.
Like maybe calculate big bags in your code solution that you posted earlier today.
Wait, what? Say that again.
Like,
Bags.
yeah, like there was that problem and you posted the solution to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and didn't you? So I guess what I was thinking was a callback function was like when you separated them out into two functions and then you called one function inside the other one.
No, that's okay. So no.
Oh, I have one more try.
Yeah.
It's when you want to pass in a function as an argument of another function.
Ooh.
Like
So that's typically where the callback function goes. Yes, but I wouldn't accept that as the definition of a callback function.
We're lost.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. It's fine. We could, let's say, so, did I lock this page? What did I did? All right. Actually, let's like go somewhere that actually, so typically by just JavaScript standards, a callback function would be passed in as the last argument to a function. I guess that's pretty standard, but let's say, we have a function called, I don't know, do it function, function do it. And we want to like, I don't know, add two numbers. I don't know. We're going to do something 14 plus 1, and then we're going to call, so you could pass in a callback function. And then, so this is also a terrible example because this is kind of what you were referring to earlier, but it's not, because what a callback function does in like plain terms is it's the function that's called at the end of some event, but we don't know when that event happens. So it all has to do with the inherent asynchronicity in JavaScript. So maybe a better example would be document.add event listener. We say click, and then we give it a function here. This is such a better example. Ignore my top one. Ignore this. This is not. So this function is a callback function because we don't know at what point in time click is going to happen and at what point in time, but we know that when this happens, we want this function to be called. Same thing if you were like using the fetch API. Well, this gets into promises, which is kind of like the same thing. But anytime, like callback functions are used in JavaScript to say at some given point in time, I know now what I want you to do at some point in time that I don't know when this thing completes or when this thing fires. So that could be an event. That could be getting data back from a database. That could be getting data, like hitting an API and getting that data back. I don't know when that's going to happen, but I know JavaScript in the event loop is going to go do it. And then at some point when that completes, here's the function. I'm going to give it to you now because I don't have a way to give it to you when that data gets back. So those are called callback functions. They're functions that are given at a point in time to be called and executed at a later point in time after some asynchronous event. Yeah. And I'd say probably like this is probably the one you're most common to, or if you've done stuff with like so promises they replace callbacks, but they became a thing because of the problems with callbacks. So I won't get into that, but that's essentially what a callback function is. And when you would use it is anytime like you have something that needs to execute after some event or after something that happens asynchronously. Explain the notion of responsive design, how it works, and you can use an example.
Responsive design is designing a web application to be able to render appropriately according to different screen sizes. So if you have a desktop, if you have a page it would be considered to be responsive if it adjusts in layout and structure according to a smaller screen size.
Yep. It's a pretty easy one. What do you know about cores?
The only thing I know about it is that it caused a huge error for me one time in the browser when I was trying to serve an API request. And so I had to like install this extension that throttled it. And then I learned about having your own developer browser in Chrome, and that helped. But yeah, that's all I know about it, is that it caused a huge pain in the butt for me one time.
So CORS stands for cross-origin resource sharing. And what it's built into the browser. So you really only will encounter it in a browser. And what it's aimed to do is prevent resources from loading from some domain that isn't the origin domain. So if I'm on, like, typically with APIs, you can run into this, especially if you're writing your own, and you have your API hosted on some domain and you try and call that API and load a resource from it from like localhost or from some other domain, you can run into this because the browser will go try and fetch that and look at the headers in the response and say, hey, you don't like allow cross origin or like the allow origin. I can't remember what the header is, but if you specify a header, you can specify what domains or origins are allowed to request this resource. And typically, if you want to allow the world to access it, you can just put a star there. And that way, when the browser goes and fetches it and gets those headers and sees, okay, I'm allowed to use this resource, and it loads it. If it doesn't find those CORS headers, it's going to bark at you and say, and yell out about cross-origin resource sharing, blah, 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 and is not going to load it for you. So that's why it's important. That's what it does.
So I have a question about that. Is that something that you have to configure for the receiving end application, or for like the API itself that you built? Like
the API itself, it's specified in the response headers. So the headers that you send to a client, to a browser after they've requested your API, you'll want to return with allow origin. What is it? Allow origin resource, allow resource, allow origin something. It's like 3 words. Access control, allow origin, that. So if you just return that access control, allow origin, and then usually a star, unless you want to specify the domains that have access to your resource, that will solve it. So it'll look like this. In the header response. Cool. What's the difference between an ID and a class? CSS selector.
ID is a selector that should only be used once. A class is a selector that you can use multiple times to apply similar styling or the same styling to across different elements.
Cool. And how would I specify an ID versus a class in CSS? What symbols would I use?
Sure. Class would be period and followed by the class name, whereas an ID uses the pound symbol or a hashtag.
Have you ever used MVC, and what can you tell me about it?
What are the 3 letters?
MVC. Oh, do I need to blow this up? I always forget.
A little blurry.
Hold on. Are you gonna blow up, or are you just gonna? Well, it's MVC. I don't know why I'm not. It's not liking me today. No dice. Yeah. Have you ever heard of MVC? Model View Controller?
No.
Okay. Yeah, so that's MVC is a way, it's kind of like a framework. It's a way of organizing your code into models, views, and controllers where the models are how basically your database tables and your database schema and how like the objects that represent an entity in your database. Your views would be your client-side views, like what gets rendered ultimately to the browser, and your controllers contain your business logic. So a request would come in, it'd be handled by a controller. If that controller needed some data, it would make a call out to the model to go get that data. It would get that data back, and then ultimately it would flush it out and render it using a view, which would be some template for whatever controller that you're currently accessing. Super popular, like pretty much every modern web framework follows it. There's some exceptions, but it's heavily looked at as a way to structure applications. So if you aren't familiar with it now, I would take a look at it and just how to structure a program with that in mind, or an application with MVC, and like where just knowing that like your controllers are going to have business logic, models, or your views are going to have like your presentation, and your models are going to be your database objects. So what's your understanding and experience with object-oriented programming? I know we've heard of this one.
I think, Lucia, you're talking, it's on mute.
Sorry.
Yeah.
My understanding of it is that it's programming that uses objects and calling on those objects methods to get stuff done. And I've both refactored non-object oriented code into object oriented code and written it from scratch.
Cool. Anything to add?
So to kind of build on what Lucia was saying, object-oriented programming is really a paradigm of programming in which you are really making a program or application a little bit more modular by defining classes. And with this, you have the benefit of being able to inherit from one another, from one class to another class, and share information and have a pattern in which, it's a way to just organize, not just objects, but organize and structure your code and make different components of it modular and independent from one another, so that it has a lot of benefits, such as being able to scale up easier and work on different components without affecting other components.
Did I send you my how Java ruined object-oriented programming?
No.
I didn't send it to you? All right, I'm going to post it.
How Java did?
How Java did, yeah. Java ruined OOP.
Okay.
Because the OOP that is taught today and what you're describing is not what it is. So I would accept both those answers as satisfactory answers to this question. However, personally, I have a gripe with the way that is taught, because that's not what OOP actually was, and it's not what the three fundamental characteristics of object-oriented programming. It was originally centered around encapsulability and message passing, and being able to hot swap stuff at runtime, keeping all your stuff in this black box so that you could theoretically, the runtime doesn't know what goes on in that box, and you communicate not by having this shared state with anything. You communicate through sending messages between two different objects because they don't know anything about each other. They just know you're a black box. So if I want to communicate with you, I have to send you a message and you have to like send me a reply. So this whole idea of like inheritance and objects and like Java did that. Java took a OP and like came up with this idea of, you know, all these things. And in one way, yeah, it is, like you said, it's a paradigm to, you know, of programming and the way that, you know, object-oriented programming works, but it's not, it's a deviant of like originally what the principle was when it was first coined. So that's all. I'll try and find the article. I know I have it linked and I'll post it in the Discord for everybody to read. How would you explain APIs to a non-technical person or stakeholder?
I have done that to friends who have asked about it, and what I say usually is that it's a database that you can access from the client side to request and then change the data on the database.
Okay.
So that
Anything to
precludes
add?
knowledge of client side and database, but
Yeah. Yeah, I would. So,
So
do we?
are you? I think what Lucio was saying is that's RESTful APIs. I think there are other types of APIs, right? And I'm not. Because for example, like the one that I use, like the Google Translations API, that's not really a RESTful API. But I'm not sure if like that the definition of a database necessarily applies to that instance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's an API in this context of the Google Translations API that I worked with is referring to more as a separate technology that I'm accessing, and I'm using their tools and all of that. Like I know they're not storing all of the things that I'm asking for in a database, but somehow I'm using, you know, those technologies, and they're calling it an API. So I'm not exactly 100% clear on that definition either.
Yeah, I'd say it's more like a reference book of things that you can do. So it's like whether you want to call it a menu or a glossary or like an index or something, like it's just I hate to use the word of like a contract. It almost is like a contract, and you could use that analogy too, where but I also kind of like the menu analogy where it's like it's a list of things that you can do. So imagine you're at a restaurant and, you know, you walk in, they give you a menu. You can look at the menu and choose what to do, and you're going to get something like the menu says chicken and rice, and you say, hey, I would like chicken and rice, and the waiter goes back to the back end to where all the cooks are and brings something out to you and hands down like a fish fillet. Like, you expected to get chicken and rice, that was what the description was, but you got like a fried fish fillet or whatever. You're gonna be like, no, like I expected. So you know what you expect from the description, you know what to ask for because you have the menu item. And it's kind of like, you know, the waiter's kind of like the API. You tell him, well, like the menu's kind of like the API and you're like the client, and then you tell the server, like, which is the server, the waiter, the server, like, go get me a chicken and rice, and he goes to the back end and comes back with chicken and rice and serves it to you. So I don't know, you can steal that example if you feel it's helpful. I don't know, that's maybe helpful. It seemed to come together well, but I don't know, like,
yeah, it makes sense.
I don't know.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like the API is specifying, you know, what it is that you can do and how it is that you interact with their tools, right? And that's what they're the ones who are putting the things on the menu in that sense,
right?
You can't. So it's a little bit, it's structured in a rigid way that, you know, that allows a user to interact with it, but in a very specific manner.
Yep. And to your point, yeah, it is more than just like a RESTful, just like creating and deleting resources. You can have like, there's APIs in just how you do a system to system, or there's an API with like, payment gateways and stuff. Like there's just APIs with everything. There's APIs to the other day I was trying to figure out how to send commands to my treadmill to make it speed up, because they have a protocol that you can like speed up, do the incline and do the speed and stuff. There's an API hacked for my printer that allows me to push a button instead of walking over to the printer, push a button and make it scan documents and get them into PDFs on my machine because I'm lazy and don't want to walk 15 feet to my printer. So anything these days that communicates as software has an API. This isn't necessarily an answer to the question. It's just kind of to iterate on that point of not all APIs are RESTful, that there are pretty much everything that you can interact with using programming usually exposes some API for you to be able to do that without needing to know the internals of it. Again, kind of that black box mindset. Cool. Real quick, last few ones. How about recursion? Who can tell me about a recursive function and recursion?
I don't know that we've covered that in our curriculum yet. I think I saw something on it coming up, but on Free Code Camp when I was doing it, it looked like a function that, I mean, for lack of like a better description, it kind of calls itself until it's finished.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, it's just a function that calls itself. And that can be super powerful. It can also be super efficient. So, but that's in the bare bones is what it is. How do you test your applications? You don't have to dig deep into this, but have either of you kind of thought much about testing and explored kind of what's worked for you or what hasn't worked or anything in that aspect? I don't know that there's been a ton of testing, but you might have. I know you've probably done some.
Yeah, we've done unit tests, Flask tests, and Jasmine tests, and we've learned to do both like unit tests, which test the way that one part of, like they used a washing machine analogy to explain it to us, so that the unit test would test like one specific part of the washing machine, whereas an integration test tests the final product, like is the piece of clothing clean at the end. So when it comes to our projects, we're to use both of those just to make sure that we have the final product and that the units are all working in the way that we want them to.
Cool. And then our last one, are you going to add to something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I would also mention that I'm also using test as a tool to kind of serve as a checklist, right? So this kind of follows a little bit more the test-driven development paradigm, in which once I have an idea of what it is that I'm going to be coding and I have a good understanding of what the input and output will be for functions or different routes, then I can begin, before I actually begin to write those functions, I can go ahead and begin writing tests, right, for different cases, to test for different types of inputs, and making sure that specifying what I would want the final product to be outputting. And then as I complete the actual function, writing the function and program itself, running the test as I go to see what parts I still need to do to complete the actual function or project itself. Cool.
Just realized I could have just resized it on my other screen and did something like that. Anywho, constructor. I'll get this down one of these days. What is a constructor?
A constructor is used in classes. It's used when you're defining a class, and it's a set of lines of code that you want to run every time that you call a new instance of this class, that you create a new instance of it.
Yep. Cool. So hopefully that was slightly helpful, or at least got you thinking about some things and what can or will be asked. happy to share more specifically next week if that's what you guys want to do next week. We'll talk about that in a second. As far as the problems and the challenge that we ended last week with, which was the user IDs. Where did we get with that? I know it was causing some grief.
No, I actually got one. Luckily, I just finished this application that did something similar, but I was using Find. And at first I was using Find as a way to filter out the array or select the ones that I was wanting to, but I realized Find only retrieves the first one. It looks like that's what it was doing. The first match, the first object that matches the case, but filter, it doesn't do that. Filter will return all of them, and that's the one that I ended up using. Do you want me to share the one line of code that I was able to write?
Did it solve it? Or you only got one line?
No, it's the function is one line, and it's solving it.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah,
I'm curious.
I mean, maybe it's not. Now you got me thinking. Wait. Here, do you want me to share the screen or what?
Yeah, just share your screen.
Okay. Okay, it's sharing. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is it. So what it's doing is it's using a filter to take the user, each user that's in the array, and we can call this whatever it is that we want to call it, but it will take every instance of this array and only return all of the ones that match this case here. So wherever the user age is greater than or equal to 18, that will return, whatever the ones that match. So I will return this one and this one. And I actually have here, when I run this node exam.js, I get those two returned.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that works. I was looking at, I knew that there was more to it, but not in that one. So yes, I retract my puzzled look. Yeah, that was pretty much all that one was doing. Cool. All right, so get rid of you, come back here. So I guess that leaves us with, what do we want to do next week? Or what's game plan? Do we want to look at more code stuff? Do we want to do code problems on our own and then come back and talk about them next week? It seems like both of you watched the code test video. I don't know if there was any questions with that or if that was just kind of like, cool. I don't know. What has been the most helpful, and what do we want to do for next week, which I think is the last week scheduled officially.
For me, practicing the challenges has been the most helpful.
Yeah, I agree with Lucia. Like, I think last week we did a live challenge, right, where we didn't previously know what the question was, and then I think Samuel was the one that went on and did the actual challenge and we did like a walkthrough of the whole process of solving it. And you gave some feedback as to how he did regarding like communicating as he was doing it, what he was doing good and all of that, and that was like super useful. So maybe doing that, maybe taking turns with one of those challenges and walking through it to whoever's present. I don't know.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. I've been we might end up spending the entire time on one problem, which is my concern, but I guess that's okay. I can give, maybe what I'll do is I'll take like these two larger ones that are a little bit more involved and post them. Actually, I can take three because there's two back-end ones, and then this one, this web timer, is a front-end one, and I'll post them in the Discord, and then if y'all want to take one or all of them, whatever you want to do between now and next week, and figure out a solution or get something done. And then what we can do is we can start off next week with reviewing them and or talking about any issues and doing them live. And then whoever wants to take them, if you were the only one that did it, you can lead, or if multiple people did the same one, then we can collab. But I think that would help us, instead of having to like start from the beginning and introduce the thing and get everybody on the same page. That'd help us save a little bit of time, and we can actually look at it and answer any questions about it, or just kind of talk about it as we go through. Does that sound like a plan? Is everybody cool with that? Cool. I'll post those in the Discord, and so we can at least hit 3 new problems to talk about next week, and then maybe a 4th if we blow through those. But yeah, if not, 3 will be good. Cool. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you everybody once again for coming out. Tell your friends. If you have any questions, hit me up. Yeah, always open to feedback. So that said, class dismissed.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul.
All right, guys. See you.
Peace out.